Star Trek canon has always been a major factor on a lot of Trekkies' minds. And when it comes to Strange New Worlds, the new Trek series has been under a very serious and close microscope. But did Strange New Worlds just confirm that the series itself takes place in a new timeline? Well, today we'll discuss that and ask the question, does that make sense? Hello and welcome to another episode of Does That Make Sense? A Star Trek themed web series that discusses various odd or inconsistent Trek topics brought up over the years by you, this channel's audience. Today's video is on Strange New Worlds and the possibility that it takes place in a separate timeline. Of course, as always, I'll be playing devil's little advocate about this topic in order to foster amazing discussions in the comments section below. So without further ado, let's dive in and ask the simple question, does that make sense? Since Star Trek Discovery launched, many in fandom have been asking the question, even hotly arguing, that what they refer to as New Trek takes place in a totally separate timeline from the Prime one. Citing various visual changes to canon in terms of technology and the general look, their hopes would be dashed when the powers that be would declare that in fact the new Star Trek series take place in the same Prime universe as the old Star Trek series. That means that Discovery leads into Strange New Worlds and then into Star Trek the original series. But how's that possible, as the Enterprise from Strange New Worlds looks very different both externally and internally from what we see in TOS? Are we to believe that a more advanced-looking Starship Enterprise was downgraded sometime before Kirk took command of her? Of course, the obvious solution would be to simply say that these specific new Trek series take place in an alternate universe. One very close to the Prime one, yet still different in many ways. But again, the powers that be have made it clear that that isn't the case. So, what other options are there? Well, when it comes to time travel, Star Trek has always played fast and loose with the concept. Oftentimes, we'll see our heroes interacting with many people or objects, sometimes even removing people from their era and bringing them back to the future. Also, oftentimes, we get flimsy excuses like this was supposed to happen this way, in order to justify that there are no repercussions to the timeline. Take, for example, the Kelvin timeline. In that case, the Narada goes back in time, fights the USS Kelvin, and as a result, a brand new universe is created, one in which Captain Kirk's father died shortly after his birth. Yet, in the TNG episode Yesterday's Enterprise, the Enterprise C heads forward in time, and instead of a new universe being born, it's simply the Prime timeline that's changed. Again, with the TOS episode City on the Edge of Forever, McCoy goes back in time, but again, instead of a new universe being created, the Prime timeline is again changed. There's no real reasons ever given as to why one person traveling back in time creates a new universe, while another one doing the exact same thing simply alters the current timeline. Now enter Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Something which has always piqued my interest over my 4+ decades of being a Star Trek fan is the eugenics war. In the 1990s, Khan Nooney and Singh would rise to power and at some point would leave the planet Earth in a sleeper ship to end up battling Captain James T. Kirk in the 23rd century. It's a great story idea, and in the 1960s, the 1990s seemed far enough off to be able to make such a declaration. And since Star Trek wanted us to believe that the Prime timeline was our future, when the 1990s hit, Trekkies everywhere had to accept that those elements of our timeline never happened. But with Season 2, Episode 3 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, we might be getting an interesting answer and a course correction. During a scene between a Romulan and La'an, we get this line.
And all this was supposed to happen back in 1992, and I've been trapped here for 30 years!
This line seems to suggest right then and there that the timeline has indeed been changed. For some reason, instead of the rise of Khan in the 1990s, it's now been delayed for 30+ years. and apparently that's due to Romulan interference. And another line,
And it's almost as if time itself is pushing back and events reinsert themselves and all this was supposed to happen.
seems to suggest that although they keep trying to change history, the Star Empire has had very little success, as time seems to like to push back and re-alter itself to generally follow the original timeline. The ramifications of these two lines cannot be overstated. If the Romulans are changing the timeline here and there, then that means that although we're watching the Prime timeline, like the episode Yesterday's Enterprise, the timeline has been altered and affected by their interference. Instead of the Eugenics War taking place in the 1990s, they'll take place at around the year 2040, maybe even leading directly to World War III. And if this is the case, even if Cochrane's warp flight takes place on the same date, and at the same time that the Prime timeline has shown us that it does, the effect of the future of humanity, Starfleet, and the Federation could explain away the differences in how the Enterprise looks both inside and out. With those eugenic wars fresher on humanity's mind, technology created for space travel could have been altered, as Earth placed more resources in other areas that it may not have been placed into before. Research could have been doubled, increased, redeveloped to make things like larger starships with larger bridges with view screen windows a very probable possibility. Of course, there is a downside to this idea. Since we know that Star Trek Picard Season 3 shows us the Enterprise D as she appeared in Star Trek The Next Generation, that means that by the 2360s, the timeline will have basically fully corrected itself. Of course, the Enterprise D weaving and firing through the Borg cube could be a sign that even that era has been slightly affected by the changes in the timeline, since we've seen on multiple occasions the fact that the Big D was a sluggish and not so powerful starship. But as for the time of Star Trek the original series, the adventures of William Shatner's James T. Kirk could have been significantly altered. In fact, some of those events may never have happened, while other events may have happened, but happened with significant differences. It will be interesting to see if this throwaway line in the episode was put there as a thread to the bigger picture. And perhaps when Strange New Worlds does finally come to an end, we'll see a story where the timeline is fixed back to the TOS era looking one, with Captain Pike handing over the keys to the Starship Enterprise to a young William Shatner as Captain James T. Kirk. And then this will be followed by a loving shot of the TOS Enterprise leaving dry dock to boldly explore Strange New Worlds on a new 5-year mission. But whether or not this will happen, well, only time will tell. But what do you think? Do you think Strange New Worlds is taking place in an altered Prime timeline? Is the Temporal Cold War to blame for all these time shenanigans? Would you like to see the ending I described for the series? Well, leave your thoughts and ideas in the comments section below. I'm looking forward to reading what you have to say. Thank you all for watching, and as always, live long and prosper.